Hello everyone and welcome to Masters. Used to be Monday Masters, but I believe it's Tuesday. Tuesday Masters. I'm gonna change the name, right? That should fit. Alright, so I'm Grandmaster Denes Boros. Pleased to meet you if I didn't meet you before, and everyone online. Steve gave a beautiful lesson on queen endings, so that's good. More queen endings, the better. It takes a long time and it's grueling, but without blood, sweat, and tears, what is chess? Probably just tears. Now, if you want to become really, really good at chess, you learn about sacrifices. You do all your puzzles on that chess site, Yahoo, I believe, and then you come up with ideas that, wait a minute, you can actually do different type of sacrifices. The sacrifice we're going to talk about this time is positional sacrifices. Now, this game, well, I claimed it's modern. Well, it's not from the ancient times, so it's not like 1700s or 1400s. It'd be pretty cool, but this one's actually from 1988. Well, it's not the freshest of the games, but you'll see, because this game is between Boris Gelfand and Grigory Serper. Serper is very well known in America, very, very strong player, emigrated from the Soviet Union, and Gelfand is an Israeli player and, of course, a World Championship challenger, and played a match against Vichy Anand. So let's take a look. So d4, knight f6, c4. Now, in modern times, after Fischer, people, of course, play e4, and it's very popular. But, of course, d4 is the other big move. e4, d4, you're trying to claim stake in the center. c4, d5, e6, e3. Does anyone know the name of this opening? Semi-Slav. Yes? And there's also another version of this. It's like a sub-name. Just like a last name, first name, kind of base.
You're talking about the Slav?
So this is the Slavs. That's correct. But it is the anti-Maran. Correct. Chat knows their openings. It's actually very important to know your opening names because it's so much easier to search. So this is the Slav variation, Maran. Knight d7, and everyone and their grandma goes queen c2 because oftentimes they can't decide where this bishop wants to go. Does it want to go here? Does it want to go to d3? And that's why they kind of wait a little bit to decide. Now, Gelfand has nothing to fear and doesn't hesitate. Now, you can actually put the bishop here, but in that case, your bishop isn't really exerting a lot of pressure in the center. Now, as you may note, it's all going to hinge on these center squares. So if they can, they put a lot of pressure early on. So they're kind of preparing. Gelfand is preparing this e4 break. Bishop e7, somewhat of a sideline. The biggest move here is to capture, practically stating that, well, you actually wasted a move. I'm going to gain time on your bishop. And now I attack you again. So black is sort of playing catch up with every move. But what do you think could be sort of the drawback of going d takes mb5? We're not going to get into too deep in this one yet. But what do you think is sort of the downside here for black?
He leaves a backward pawn on c6.
One backward pawn on c6, that's correct. But there's also something that's, from a strategical perspective, you could almost call it like mistake. Although it'd be pretty harsh. Like, black is playing based on a concept. From a strategic standpoint, you can criticize this decision. What did black do that's a no-no?
Gave up the center.
Gave up the center, exactly. So even though black one time gave up the center, and eventually white can get 2 pawns in the middle, claiming an advantage. Now, of course, Chet is already claiming and just giving some moves. Of course, there is bishop here. There's bishop here. There's so many moves here. It's, of course, a very theoretical position. But it is something to note that if nothing really happens, white will have the advantage because of the middle squares. So when black decides to go bishop to e7, it's actually not an illogical decision. Black is saying, well, I'm not willing to give up space. You have to fight for it. And in fact, if you want to have a big fight and if you want to improve your chess game, give as little space, give as little advantages to your opponent as you possibly can, because that will make it a bigger fight. Okay, so when black goes bishop e7, we'll have to come up with a plan how to expand. What will be our future plans? Any ideas how we could try to expand, eventually at least? Uncle Mary plays the Maran? Maybe. Haven't asked her yet. So there's a suggestion of going pawn to b3, bishop b2. Yes, but it's more like slowly developing your pieces. It's not really going for broke. And there is this kind of a different way of approaching chess. There is a way of looking at it saying, okay, I'm just going to get my pieces out and later on I will outplay you. I will beat you later on. But the most ambitious play always revolves around the center. You can always move around it, but that usually is less ambitious. Most ambitious play is always central.
You could probably maybe castle
Mm-hmm.
and eventually try to play pushing f3, maybe reroute the knights to d2
Mm-hmm.
to support some push on to e4 potentially with f3.
This pawn push or which one?
Yeah, I'm saying
Mhm.
castling.
Castles?
I don't know the exact. I would have
Okay.
to like, sort of, but I'm just thinking general ideas.
Okay.
Like maybe going f3
Uh-huh.
to support e4 push, or
Uh-huh.
even knight like f3 and knight d2. Now I'm going to put so much
Okay.
pressure on e4.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe king h1
Mhm.
to get way off that diagonal, or just not way off, but just
Mhm.
off of it.
Okay. Yeah, so very well said. We want to have that e4 break-in. So if we can get that e4 break-in, white is going to actually get an extra pawn in the middle. If you have an extra pawn in the middle, most likely you're slightly better. Now there is always this idea of knight e5 to f4, but notice that every step you take, there'll be a downside, a drawback. If you go knight e5 to e4, for example, yes, you gain control of an important square, but you lose some right behind it. Now, the same thing with knight d2. The issue with knight d2, every move that has an idea behind it has a drawback. Now, we can kind of see, of course, you're preparing this e4 break. But what could be the downside of moving that knight there?
Closing your bishop.
You close your bishop. That's something important to notice. And what else?
You'd allow c5.
Hmm?
You'd allow c5.
Sure, they can go c5
No, e5.
or e5, whichever. It's actually almost interchangeable. Yes.
But I guess black doesn't want to break like that.
So, knight d2, you're predicting white to go e4. And oftentimes you can sort of stare into the future and predict, okay, if my opponent gets to make those moves, which pieces become loose for white? So let's say I castle. You go here. what becomes sort of loose in white's position, undefended? The bishop. What else? D4. Exactly. So that's actually the thing whenever you ultra prepare a move. Like you make double, triple sure that that move works. When you do that, you often move away a piece that guards some critical squares. So when you played knight to d2, this pawn on d4 lost the protector. So whenever you will go for e4, this pawn becomes a weakness. So actually, it's much more important to take a little bit of a risk. Just make the natural pawn break instead of over-preparing. Because when you over-prepare, you actually create new targets in the position. And I hope that is clear. And by the way, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm all here. I'm actually hoping to hear questions as much as possible. But okay, let's see what happened. Castles, and queen e2. He moves the queen away, and now goes for e4. Now, because of this close position, you might be wondering why not e4 immediately. Of course, it is possible. But because the position is closed, actually, white has the time to prepare it a bit more slowly. Doesn't have to rush it. b6, e4, and now knight, of course, is there to protect. D takes. How would we capture back? Knight. Why not the bishop? Okay, so you just like the bishops more. Okay.
Position is getting open, and when the position is open in the endgame, you better off with bishops than with knights.
Okay, so you're feeling that, okay, the bishop, I'm giving up the bishop, and we'll need the bishop pair later on. Okay. Now the funny thing is, and the reason we pause here, is that there is this guy, David Bronstein, who would actually stop himself from immediately making a move. Like all of you, including me, we would naturally just capture with the knight. But just because something is unnatural doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's not something everyone would consider. Because even though, yes, it's correct, you're giving up the bishop pair, but for the moment, it is a close position, and knights are actually known to be better in close positions. Now, to be fair, probably this one's not the best, but can you play it this way? Probably you can. And oftentimes, in closed, like this is sort of a semi-closed position, often you'd get fights like this. But anyways, knight takes e4, bishop b7, rook d1. Whenever you can put your opponent's queen on an x-ray, do it. Rook d1, queen c7, bishop g5. Very standard. Get your knights out first, then your bishop. Also notice, this bishop has been sitting here for forever, right? It was waiting for the right moment, waiting for black to choose their setup. Once black sort of decided that, oh, okay, this is my setup, then white says, okay, I'm not going to put my bishop here. I am going to put my bishop, well, why? I am putting pressure on that bishop, sort of x-raying it, because it's undefended. Can't even take here, by the way, because of this idea. If I do it differently, if I go here, takes, well, guess what? I can take with my queen. And that's actually the whole point of holding the bishops back. You're waiting for the right placement. This mostly comes into play when you play these closed positions. When you're playing open positions, you got to get out quickly because you get into trouble. So here, bishop g5, rook e8. So as I said earlier, it's all about positional sacrifices. Now, at first blink, it's going to be difficult to sort of figure out what should we do? But chess, as we all know, and if you didn't, now you'll know, chess is a mean game. Your opponent wants to have a good time, and you're here to ruin it. So, in order to be the worst person of the party, you have to figure out what your opponent intends to do. What do you think Black wants to play sooner or later?
C5.
C5. Black wants to play this move. Why? Why do they want to go C5?
Open up the bishop.
Yep. They want to open up this sleeping beast on B7. Now you know what your opponent is intending to do. Now you know how to make life miserable. You might guess how you could make life miserable for Black.
Play C5 yourself.
That's correct. C5. Now C5 is a pawn sacrifice. You are giving up a pawn, but that bishop is sort of under plenty of rubble. You can barely excavate that bishop out of that pawn mass in front of it. Now, Black can take, we take back, knight takes, bishop takes. How could we continue?
It's really tempting to take on F6.
Okay, we capture back with the pawn. Now, if it's tempting, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes temptation is good. It's a rare thing. I know. It's rare.
What if Queen C2?
Queen C2?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm thinking that preparing an attack on the
Uh-huh.
yes there.
Okay. So, Queen C2. What do you think they're going to play then? So Queen C2.
Bishop goes back.
Yeah, bishop goes back, right? So Queen C2 here.
What about taking the knight and then playing just the queen to E4, threatening the checkmate?
So if you take,
Or actually not a
Take.
checkmate, but
I'm just in time to block you. So I'm not actually saying by any means that this move is bad or this move is bad. I just want y'all to think about it a little bit. Just compare the two ideas. Because whenever you choose one, who knows if it's going to be the best move? But of course you're correct. You are playing on the fact that the bishop and pawn can be double attacked, right? If you go rook c1, you're not really achieving a whole bunch. I just go back.
Yeah. So you take the knight, pawn takes, bishop takes h7. Now queen c2 is a double attack.
So you do this, takes, check, takes, and now I check.
And you further burden the bishop.
And that bishop is still under the rubble. And this is the scenario when, for the uninitiated, you'll be looking and saying, well, 3 pawns for my opponent, 3 pawns for me, what's the difference? Well, the difference is your bishop is an honorary pawn on b7, and your king is also a little bit breezy on the king side. It's more likely to get into trouble. So what I usually do, and of course when I look at this position, queen c2 comes to my mind first too. But then I'll say, wait a minute. If I can attack it this way, maybe I can reverse engineer this and do it from a different move order. And that's actually one of the ways I think. I'm trying to find another way to get around it. Now, Serper, seeing this, didn't want to go into this. Played h6. Now, do we trade on f6? Should we trade?
I don't want to, no.
No.
Don't trade. Why not? You want to keep the pressure. So bishop h4. Also, the bishop is still pretty bad on b7. And every trade we make helps black. Now, we are going to trade, but only when it favors us. So they take on c5, take on f6. We're going to ruin the structure. Bishop takes, pawn takes, bishop c2. Actually, not what happened. Knight takes happened. Even there, even in this case, we don't really care about the fact that we lost the pawn. Why? Because this is all over the place. Our opponent's king is weakened, and this bishop will take a lot of time to excavate. So in fact, black takes, queen takes, knight f6. Okay. So the big question now is whether we want to take on f6 or not. So as you see, with these tense middle game, well, heading towards the ending, but not quite yet, you always have to decide, are you going to pull the trigger and go for something bigger? For now, we have a good position because of the bishop is pretty bad, but these things are temporary. Even if your opponent's pieces are misplaced, if you give your opponent time, they're going to exploit it or attempt to exploit it. So what I do is always looking for options. Options just like what we'll have on Thursday. Thursday, we're going to have a special event. It's going to be a theme tournament. We're going to be playing the Dragon variation, and winners will get some book prizes. So if you're interested, it's going to happen around 5 p.m.-ish. This Thursday. Now, talking about hard decisions, what moves could we consider here for white? Or would you consider?
Taking the knight.
Taking the knight. It's obviously one option. What else? Queen c4, here. So you got two options for now. Queen c4, bishop takes f6. What's the upside of queen c4?
You're not trading.
You're not trading, for sure. You're putting the lock on that bishop still. The bishop cannot move, and it doesn't really participate. So that's definitely a plus for queen c4. What about bishop f6? Is there any plus to bishop f6?
Queen h7 check looks juicy, but I don't know what happens after.
It's not threatening, the king is running away.
It runs, yeah.
So if takes check, we do have a check. We're getting closer to the king, but everyone in here is claiming that the king may run away and run for the hills.
And then two pieces are under attack. The bishop will be attacking the pawn on b2, and the queen will be under attack.
I mean, the queen wasn't under attack. I mean, you took
Unless
the...
you give another check. Well.
Okay. But you're running ahead. Now, by the way, that's important not to do so, because if you go too deep into the rabbit hole of a variation, sometimes you might be looking at the wrong line. It might be the right continuation, the first few moves, but if you go too deep, you might reject it because you don't like what you see at the end. Giving hints here. Giving hints here. That would be quite the stallion. Okay, so if we move our queen, there could be that pony becoming a great stallion over on d5. Now, if we take here, yes, the bishop is going to be strong on this diagonal, but is there a juicy apos for our pony? So what squares could we potentially exploit in this position for our knight? I know, our queen is hanging. We're going to take that knight. Don't worry about it. Don't you worry about it.
Yeah, I don't know where you would go because it feels like the bishop once it gets to f6 is just dominating our knight.
Okay, so takes. It dominates these squares, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Now knights are adventurous little beings. They travel. They go to places.
D2, C4.
Where are you heading?
Well, C4 seems like a nice place to chill.
Knight d2, knight c4. It's a nice chill spot, but is there a fancier spot? Right nearby, exactly. d6. That's exactly what Gelfand does. Now, normally, of course, we're not going to do anything silly, give up our queen. We're going to take here first. So it makes it, by the way, anytime you see a lecture, you'd be wondering, okay, well, bishop takes is clearly the best move. Anything else ain't no good. Chess isn't like that. It's possible queen c4 is good enough. Because the bishop is bad, you are over defending the pawn. Probably was rejected because black gets a good knight on d5, but white might still claim an advantage. But Gelfand decides, well, it's worth it. So takes, chases the king out, and goes knight d2. Now the thing is, you really don't care about this pawn. Let's say take, here, here. You might actually go and get your knight on e4 instead of c4, because not only do you threaten to get the knight on d6, but you're also attacking that bishop on f6. So of course it's not possible because it's checkmate. And after bishop e5, the eagle lands, and there are problems. Because I've got a double attack on the rook, the bishop. If you take, I get this passed pawn, but that's least of your problems. This is a checkmate. And again, notice that you may have been in a little bit of a worry of that b2 pawn. But because that bishop on b7 is so bad, you're technically up a piece currently. If the bishop somehow gets around, Yes, you'll be down a pawn, but it'll take a century or two. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
What is, if we do that,
Uh-huh.
have our knight there, bishop takes knight, and then we go c takes
Uh-huh.
d, and why can't the queen take the pawn? What's wrong with
I take your bishop.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yep.
Oh, there you
I mean, I'd also love to forget about that bishop, and probably black would want to forget about that bishop. But sadly, that's not going to be possible. So black goes rook d8. Still a very good move. White goes knight c4. Now, again, I tend to go with the idea you choose a plan, follow through with your plan. Super important, because that's the way you learn how good you are or how well you calculate it. So black goes rook to d5. White goes knight d6. And now Serper yoinks the pawn on c5. And now, ladies and gentlemen, white to move and play some thunderous chess. And even though Gelfand is sort of well known among the elite and professionals and chess lovers, but he's sort of fallen out of favor and people are sort of trying to forget about him. But he's been a fixture of the elite for a long time, and thankfully got the chance to play a world championship match. And this kind of shows that not only was a vicious attacker, he was incredibly creative when it came to attacking. So, this is for you, dear viewers, and everyone in here, to find Gelfand's remarkable idea. And it's probably something that was overlooked by his opponent, although, to be fair, he was in trouble anyways. Knight e4? Okay. So you're attacking my rook, attacking the bishop. Should I be a greedy, greedy little gremlin? Okay, first off, let me try being a greedy little person. And just try, defend whatever. Pawn g4. Pawns don't go backwards. Move my rook. So the issue is, you may take, but I can take back. You might even win a pawn, but are you checkmating me? Not really. In fact, I'm the one who's going to counterattack. Why am I able to counterattack? Because you moved the pawn in front of your king. Now, your idea is very interesting, and of course, it's something to consider. But unfortunately, in this case, here, like, you could play this way. It's completely legitimate. And in fact, I would prefer to do this without moving the pawn. And like if I go here, notice that I can drop my queen back and I'm safe. Probably white is still a little bit better because this bishop is still terrible. But it's not the end of the world for black. So let's Use our trusted methods. What moves would you consider here? Whatever you consider, just drop it in the hat. Just drop it right in here. Drop it in the hat.
Can you take on F7?
Is it legal? I think it's legal. It looks pretty legal to me. Knight F7 is an option. Knight E4 is an option. What else? Bishop G6. I don't know, Bishop G6 screams to me. You must be having nightmares.
Queen H8 and then knight F5.
Okay, sure. You're trying to mate me viciously. So Queen H8, Knight E4, Knight F7, Bishop G6. Okay. All right, so we've got a bunch of these ideas. Yeah, go ahead.
One more.
Okay, go ahead.
This is what happens.
Okay,
I'll take the bishop with the knight.
okay.
I
So,
attack the queen with the white bishop.
so take.
If the queen takes the bishop, then I play the rook to D7 and I checkmate with the queen.
Oh,
But
okay.
Is the queen going to take the bishop?
Okay.
Is the question.
Okay.
The queen doesn't take,
Is the question.
then there's
Okay.
no checkmate.
Okay. All right. So, what are we supposed to do now? We've got so many moves in the hat. What are we going to do about that? Well, let's go one by one, right? Let's do what she said. Check. I got no choice. I got to run. Can't touch this. Got that defended. Even though it's useless, it's not that useless. Check me again. Well, beggars can be choosers. I'm going to take. I guess you want to check me again, no? I think I'm going to block.
The end.
The end, probably. And yes, unfortunately, your queen has sort of wandered off a little bit. And luckily for black, GG yo, our pieces are not coordinated well enough. So unfortunately, this check is right out of question. We're not straight out of dodge yet. What do we have left? What moves do we have left? I shouldn't be the only one keeping count. Should be one knowing what you're thinking about. What moves did we consider? Check was one of them. We looked at knight e4. What else?
I was thinking taking on F7.
You said knight f7. What else did we say?
Bishop G6.
We got bishop g6, knight f7, and knight b7. So this. Okay, so bishop g6, someone is getting screamed at. Well, I mean, it's screaming at them. Bishop g6, well, whenever you're being attacked, at least take whatever they give you. So takes, check, this could be an idea, but the bishop, and that's why actually it's nice to have fianchetto bishops, dragon bishops, which might be useful whenever you come down to play the theme tournament. These bishops are really good at defending. They actually cover a lot of key squares for the king. Fortunately, you can't take, just lose the queen. And if you take here, this looks dangerous, but all those checkmate ideas are covered by the queen and the rook. And I don't think black is too shook about all these things. Even rook g5, and that bishop might come alive. And that usually is the end. And it all begins for the bishop. Okay, so no bishop g6, knight f7 here. knight takes, queen takes. You go here, I run. You go here, you cry. Because you trade queens, got the extra piece. Sad, sad times. And the last one standing is knight takes. Let's see, knight takes, queen takes. So, by the way, this is what I would describe as thinking logically. You looked at all the other options, they all failed. We're moving on to greener pastures. Hopefully warmer ones too. Bishop a6 was a very interesting idea. Look at it again. So you had a point, but look, maybe you'll actually see some extra little ideas in that position that you didn't notice at the first blink, because you were 3 moves behind. Now you're already at the position, you can look at it with brand new eyes. So I take, obviously, what else can I do? Queen here, right?
Yeah, but you don't need to take the bishop.
No, if
Uh-huh.
you take the bishop,
Uh-huh.
the rook comes here to d7 and then it's a checkmate.
Okay, so rook d7,
And queen's the checkmate.
King e8.
queen h8, so you've got a contender. She's saying king e8.
Double the rooks.
Double the rooks,
Bishop e7.
bishop e7.
Queen check, G, exactly.
Here
Yeah, exactly.
Check.
And checkmate.
and here. I hereby say it is mate. What if I go here? I'm being sneaky. I got to. That's the only thing I can do here.
Just take the rook, but there is no checkmate then. You just end up with the rook.
Mm-hmm.
After you take the rook and check,
Mm-hmm.
then you get the
Mm-hmm. So take
you get the piece.
and
that's it.
check. Mm-hmm. Taking the rook. Now, in fact, Gelfand was considering this idea and the other one, winning the rook immediately. So, a lot of times, these top players, they look at the exact same variations you're looking at, but then they consider, wait a second, if I go into this, maybe I like your rook better when it's all out there doing some nonsense. So practically he's doing what you're trying to do, but says, okay, it might be even more beneficial for me if I can take the rook. So goes, check. Here, takes, queen b6, rook c1. Now, also notice white is trying to put pressure on that piece when, if rook d5 would have happened, it would have actually improved black's structure. Rook takes, c5. So,
Just a quick
yeah,
question.
go ahead.
Why does black need to take the bishop though? The white bishop on
The white bishop, okay.
a6?
So why does
Why does
black actually have to capture? Well, if you go here, then of course it's the same idea of rook d7. And then you are getting mated. You are getting mated there. If you go here, I am just joining in, and you lose the same way. Go here, I take this, takes here, and it's again mate. So, that's why it has to be taken. Here, takes, rook c1, takes, c5. Now, this is that typical position where, of course, you're very close to winning. But it's very important to note how to win these positions. What should be our first step towards victory? What are the nuisances that white is facing?
Back rank.
Back rank, what else?
Pawns on the dark squares, I feel like, just 'cause the bishop.
Uh-huh. Greed is good in chess. What is the greediest move you could make?
Choose queen.
Yeah.
Not quite.
Queen takes b2 or
No, for white.
B3.
B3. Be greedy. You don't, like, the more stuff, more pawns, pieces you give, even though you're up in exchange, eventually it's not going to matter. They're going to overpower you. And especially with the king in the middle, it's better if they will have to be busy running around defending the king. So here, queen f3. Again, coming back, making sure everything's guarded. And especially, as you said, defend the dark squares. Here, rook c4. Here, rook a4. You might be wondering, what is this all about? Well, of course, what Gelfand is doing is attacking the pawn, but also puts that rook on a spot where it's stable. Nothing can move that rook, ever. And of course, it also sets up threats, putting pressure on the pawn. e5, queen e2. You push your pawn, your king actually becomes much weaker. Now, e5 I actually don't like for that reason. You might be wondering, well, okay, how do you defend these positions? It's kind of the toughest thing in chess to defend. What do you think black ought to do? What would be the best defense for black? I'm not necessarily looking for moves, I'm looking for strategy. No, never insult your opponent. Insulting your opponent will make your opponent stronger. You don't believe me, you're going to regret what you're about to do. Always respect your opponent. What's wrong with e5? Actually, taking away pieces away from the king, right? Black's best hope for defense is the magical formula that you do at airports for hours and hours. You wait, you sit, and you suffer. That too. Now, the best thing black can do is sit and wait and hope. And as long as you have pawns around the king, it'll take some extra effort for your opponent to attack it. So there is some little tiny bit of hope of surviving. when black actually goes e5, that's at the window. You're actually going for a boxing match, a boxing fight, when you're actually the inferior side. You want to avoid that. You want to duck that challenge. Queen e2. Case in point, the issue is coming. Queen d2. Oh, the a pawn is falling. Queen takes a5. Gelfand does not believe in ghosts, and he's correct. This rook actually is patrolling the fourth square. The fourth. And there's no checks there. Queen d5, queen a6. So you can, of course, do the regular, I push the side pawn, make sure there's no mate. But when there's only queens on the board, blocking with the queen is fine enough. Queen e2. And now he goes g3. h5, check, check, queen g5. And of course, you see it now, right? If the pawn was still on e6, this would be a hard task to win. But because black actually moved that pawn forward, a move and an idea that looks aggressive is actually to his own detriment. Mates are abound. Here, rook c6. And seeing that white is just going to start pushing the pawn, black resigned. Any questions before we wrap up? Any questions about the game or these type of sacrifices? Positional sacrifices, that is. Okay. Yeah?
No, all clear, all clear.
All clear?
I guess, what are you trying to do with playing e5?
What do you mean?
So if you're black here, obviously he didn't play e5 because he didn't know what to do. He played e5 because he was trying to do something that obviously didn't work, and he was clear quite quickly that it didn't work. But what was he trying to do?
So black was hoping to find a way to open up white's king side. What black was trying to do is to get aggressive. But when you're behind, too much behind, and mostly because it was too close to the king. If the king was safely tucked away here on h7, just for a case in point, let me see. If the king was here, start to push your pawn and creating counterplay makes sense.
Yeah.
But not when your king is there and you're just losing a pawn, a protector. So you want to make sure you move pawns that aren't actually there to protect your king in the first place. So black was trying to be aggressive, but it sort of backfired in his face. So that was the reason it didn't work. All right, so really hope you enjoyed your time. Hope you had fun. In a future Tuesday Masters, we are going to continue in the topic. We're going to look at more of positional play in the future as well. So hope you enjoyed it. And remember, Thursday there is a theme tournament with prizes. This Thursday.
What's the position? Do you know?
The position is the classical dragon.
Like how many moves then?
So here's the first moves. Here, d6, d4, takes, here, pawn to g6. This is the position. All right. Thank you all for coming, and see you guys next time.